This time on Jonathan Bird's Blue World, Jonathan goes deep into a Bahamas cave to find spectacular crystal formations.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Bird, and welcome to my world. I'm fascinated with caves. From the cenotes of the Yucatan to the blue holes of the Bahamas, caves are astonishingly beautiful environments, often filled with lavish decorations, crystal clear water, and strange alien life forms. Hidden in the pitch darkness. For years, I've heard about a remote cave in the Bahamas filled with incredibly fragile crystal formations. It's been compared to diving inside a chandelier. Only a handful of people have ever been into the so-called Crystal Cave, and I really want to see it. I contacted world-renowned cave explorer Brian Kakuk, who operates Bahamas Underground, a cave diving operation in remote Abaco, Bahamas, where he explores caves, leads expeditions into the caves, and advocates for the protection of Bahamas caves. Cameraman Todd and I fly to sunny Abaco, Bahamas on the cave exploration expedition of a lifetime. At Brian's shop, we prepare our gear, fill tanks, and load the van. I'm both excited and nervous to finally see this elusive cave. The Crystal Cave is way out in the pine forest, actually not very far from Dan's cave where I did my cave training. Brian is confident that the two caves actually connect, but he hasn't found the connecting passageway yet. The opening to Crystal Cave has just a thin ceiling of limestone separating it from the forest above. Brian built a set of steps down into the water with a platform for the gear. Except for the low ceiling, it's really convenient. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be the first to dive this cave. From the surface, it sure doesn't look like much. Brian has extensively mapped Crystal Cave, and most of it is totally inaccessible to divers with traditional back-mount tanks. Most cave divers wear their tanks on their backs, but some caves have tight restrictions where back-mount divers won't fit. Side-mount divers wear their tanks on their sides, so they have a thinner profile and fit through smaller spaces. Today, our entire team will be diving side-mount. My hope is to reach a famous room in the Crystal Cave called the Glass Factory. With our plan in place, we suit up. Then, the moment of truth. We head over to the cave entrance to begin what will be a 2-hour dive into Crystal Cave. Standing in the water less than 2 feet deep, it's hard to believe that this cave actually goes anywhere. Brian, Todd, and I don our tanks and check our lights.
You're getting fast at this stuff.
Yeah, baby. Even though I'm no longer a student, we still do all the safety checks because that's what cave divers do, no matter how experienced they are.
I'm a little nervous because this cave has a lot of very small passages with fragile stuff, and I don't want to break anything. So I'm going to be trying to move just as little as possible. Just be very still and not be a spaz.
Okay, prepare to be amazed.
We head to a tiny opening at the back of the cave, only about 2 feet tall, and pass through into another world. Just beyond that restriction, it opens up into a massive room. There's hardly any cavern zone. We immediately pass the stop sign. I fire up the lights on my camera and start following Brian on our path towards the Glass Factory, which is about 1,000 feet from the entrance.
Almost immediately, we hit a tight restriction. Brian and I already made a plan for this one. I pass my big camera through to him first, then wiggle up and through myself. Things are tight as we make our way closer to the glass factory, and in many cases, Brian has me go first to get the clearest water for my shots. He also keeps an eye on my fins to be sure I don't kick anything fragile. Almost all the formations in Crystal Cave are in fact made of calcite crystal. In most caves, a fat stalagmite like this would be made of opaque white calcite, otherwise known as limestone. But here in Crystal Cave, it's a translucent crystalline treasure that glows with Brian's light. Nobody is quite sure why the calcite here forms crystals. Over the last 100,000 years, this cave has alternated between submerged and dry at least 5 times. During an ice age, when glaciers cover much of the world, sea levels fall and the Bahamas caves go dry. Water dripping in from above creates cave formations like stalactites and stalagmites. They can only form in a dry cave. With the Earth currently between ice ages, sea levels are high and the caves are flooded, allowing us to swim from formation to formation. As Brian leads us further into the cave, we arrive at what looks like a crystalline cake frosting. He sticks his hand out to gently demonstrate what I haven't noticed yet. I carefully position myself for a close-up shot, and then I see clearly what he's doing. These formations, called draperies, are so thin that I can see Brian's hand right through them. It's like they're made of frosted glass. Formed by thousands of years of dripping water, these exquisite crystal curtains are super fragile. Brian touches them ever so gently. I'm not touching them at all. I'm happy to film him. Brian motions me over to a shelf to show me a thick layer of red dust. Tens of thousands of years ago, during a long dry spell, strong winds picked up iron-rich sand in the Sahara Desert. The finest particles blew all the way across the Atlantic and landed in North America, especially the Bahamas. Rain eventually washed this dust down into the limestone where it formed a layer. The high iron content makes it red like rust. The Sahara dust shows up in many of the cave formations as a red layer. Next, Brian leads us to an area of crystalline dripstone where water was running gently along the floor. A bat skeleton 15,000 years old, frozen permanently in crystal like a bug in amber. Bats flew all the way in here back when it was dry. When Brian uses his light up close to the crystal, I can see the reddish tint in a deeper layer of the stone. That's the Sahara dust layer again. Not far from the bat, Brian directs me to this puzzling crystal formation. This was a pool in the floor of the cave, filled with mineral-rich water that grew huge crystals. The tiny stalactites from the top grew huge crystals when they reached the water's surface. Crystals formed within the water grew towards the surface and spread out. Nearby, a smaller crystal pool filled with smaller crystals that look like gemstones. As we push on, we finally reach the glass factory. There's a section of the floor that was damaged sometime in the past when the floor of the cave settled. That's where we go in, staying low to avoid breaking the formations on the ceiling. This is one of the few times where Brian actually wants us to crawl on the floor, not float with perfect buoyancy. I make my way slowly into the glass factory. It's a room full of insanely delicate formations known as soda straws, dripping from the ceiling. Brian sneaks in first to provide some light. I can't believe I'm really here. I've seen pictures of this place for years and never suspected I would be here myself. It's just magical. Brian calls this formation Frozen Rain. Some of the formations have those bulbous crystal tips like I saw in the pool, showing that at some point the water level was probably right at the base of these formations. Brian calls these flower formations. With Brian's help, I'm positioned in a place where I can film safely without breaking anything. It's almost too much to take in. I have a hard time concentrating on shooting because everywhere I look, I see something amazing. All of the soda straws have a gap between the top and the bottom. They were once connected as thin columns, but as the floor subsided, they broke into upper and lower halves. The floor is littered with thousands of super thin formations that broke when that happened, but the majority of the thicker formations are still here. So why do they call these formations soda straws? Many of them really are hollow, like a straw. You could sip a beverage through this piece of fragile crystal. Up at the ceiling, some of the formations have formed offshoots going sideways instead of down. It seems illogical. Brian points out a large section with this type of crystal growth. They're called helictites, and even experts in cave formations aren't quite sure how they defy gravity when they form. The general consensus is that it's a combination of wind and surface tension in the dripping water. So it's possible that when this was a dry cave, there was a breeze through here, which means another entrance or a connection to Dan's cave, neither of which have been discovered yet. Having reached our thirds, we have to start heading back to the entrance. We've been gone so long, our surface cameraman Pierre has fallen asleep. Brian leads the way out through the swirly water of the halicline. Eventually, we come back to that tight restriction, and I have to squirm my way through again. Definitely not as elegantly as Brian. After some time decompressing, we emerge back into the cavern and onto the surface.
That cave is like another planet. The glass factory room is like nothing you've ever seen. I can stop cave diving now. I mean, it was fun taking the class and everything, but I don't need to do it again because where am I ever going to find anything that beautiful?
Wait till we show you the good stuff.
That's just, there can't possibly be anything better than that.
With our grand adventure into Crystal Cave over, once again we begin the tedious process of hauling our gear back to the van. But I don't mind because all this gear made it possible for me to visit a place that only a few dozen people have ever seen. Many more people have been to the summit of Mount Everest than have ever ventured into this cave and seen the glass factory. Yes, I will admit that I have a lot of memorable adventures in the Blue World, but this one is by far one of the most special. The Caves of Abaco are indeed treasures that need protection, with Brian Kakuk as their most ardent advocate. I'll be doing my part to help Brian in his quest to protect these caves, the exquisite Crystal Caves of Abaco.